Ready to talk about innovation that's changing the world and meet the people that are making it happen? Welcome to the Global Code Podcast.
Here, we go beyond the buzzwords, beyond the headlines to uncover the real stories behind technology's global impact.
From AI to clean tech, blockchain to biotech, we are exploring innovations that matter and talking to pioneers driving change in every corner of the world with a focus on people, purpose, and possibility.
Wondering how AI and emerging technologies will shape your future?
Yeah, we're wondering that too.
So we are asking the boldest thinkers and builders we can find.
Come with us on this journey into the heart of innovation across borders and boundaries.
This is Global Code.
Tech for everyone, everywhere.
We're super excited today to have Diya Wynn with us. And Diya, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
You are. You got it right.
Perfect. And I'm super excited about this conversation because she's a technology leader who's at the forefront of every major digital transformation over the past 25 years. She has a deep breadth of expertise spanning the internet, e-commerce, social media, mobile, cloud, and now AI. She brings a unique perspective to the intersection of emerging technology and humanity. As a principal responsible AI lead, she is a champion for ethical, safe, inclusive AI development and empowers organizations to build trust in AI. Earlier in her career, Diya worked in startups, scaling products for acquisition and in consulting roles. An author, international speaker, and guest lecturer on responsible and inclusive technology, she serves on multiple nonprofit boards and volunteers with various organizations. In 2023, she was named one of Business Leader's top 15 people in enterprise AI and top 100 people in AI and one of the 100 billion women in AI and ethics. Oh my gosh, you are incredible. We are so honored to have you here. I feel like I need to be presenting an award too now to you because
No.
to add to your list. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm going to pass it over to Shdan to get the ball rolling for today.
Dear, if you can't tell, we are just absolutely giddy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
The bio alone is, of course, just incredibly impressive. And so one of the things that we always do with folks who are in this AI space, especially when we think about responsible AI, is we like to ask for our listeners, how do you define it? How do you define responsible AI? What does that mean for you?
Sure. So I think about responsible AI, and you heard in my bio, we talked a little bit about some of the other work that I've done in sort of digital transformation. And in earlier stages, I was working in the cloud, and we talked about operating model transformation. What do we need to do in order to get the most out of our investment in the cloud? And in doing so, this sort of unpacked the necessity to look at people, process, and technology holistically. And it is that same frame of mind or frame of thinking that I approached responsible AI when we were starting the practice. It was saying that we needed to have this holistic look at across people, process, and technology, and to ensure that we were mitigating the risk and maximizing its benefit. So that's how I define responsible AI, right? The things that we do, this holistic approach to establishing best practices across people, process, and technology to ensure that we are mitigating risk, unintended impacts, and maximizing benefit. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to unpack all of that, what that means throughout the rest of the conversation. But that's the short and simple sort of definition, the way that I like to think about it.
No, I appreciate that, and I love that. Listen, I'm a sucker for a good framework. So people, process, technology, that PPT,
Right.
3-part comprehensive.
Well, and I think because people are used to that terminology, it also gives them a frame of reference when we start thinking about this as a transformative technology that requires sort of organizational transformation in order to leverage it in responsible ways. And in order for it to achieve the outcomes or the goals that companies are expecting of it. So um, I think I think it works, but it also, provides a common frame of reference, hopefully that makes it much more easily adaptable for organizations.
I, I think it's a great point. And to your point, when you're thinking, and to that point, when you're thinking about that transformation, how do you ground folks in things that are familiar to help ease the transition of that transformation a bit? Are there key pillars? So I know again we're talking about people, process, and technology and things like that, but are there key pillars that you try to guide organizations around when they're adopting that stance and that perspective?
Absolutely. So when I started to look at this, and at the time there were, and this is true right now as well. There are tons of principles, pillars, tenets, etc., that exist out there, and so there are probably similarities in terms of the way that I look at this. But one of the first ones is value alignment, right? Ensuring that we're thinking about the way in which we're leveraging technology or AI in ways that are consistent with the mission, vision, value of the organization, and actually doing a pause to make sure that we or organizations are asking that question, right? And just because we can do it, should we do it, right? Is sort of in that context. Is this the right thing to do at this particular time for this organization or for the business? And does it align well? The next for me is inclusion, and I separate this from fairness. Fairness is one of those items, or one of the pillars that I talk about as well, or use as an area to focus on. But inclusion is important for me because I think it calls out the necessity to have uh, diversity and include the right voices and perspectives of all stakeholders that would be impacted by the technology. That's important. There was a study by AI Now. This is old now, but we still continue to see uh, uh, evidence of this. They said the problem with AI and bias, or AI and fairness, is actually a diversity problem, right? And while diversity in technology or diversity in corporate America can be difficult to tackle, I think there are ways in which we can ensure the voice and perspective of all those stakeholders, and that inclusion is there. So we need to make that front and center. Training and education is another core pillar for me. And I focus on this for two reasons. One is we can't assume that this is a technology problem and our data scientists have this figured out, right? This idea of ethical and responsible development. And so we want to make sure that we're equipping everyone throughout the entire life cycle that has a role to play in developing and or building and deploying AI systems, that they're equipped appropriately to understand where risk occurs, where there's potential for unintended impact, and be dialed into what their responsibility is. And that has to come with training, right? The other part of this is because we understand that there is going to be some impact to individuals as a result of AI. Whether that is my job changes and some of my responsibilities look different, the other skills are required now because of the way in which we're using technology, or displacement as a result of AI being able to do something that previously a person in certain roles were doing. And I think this question about, or the necessity to focus on and understand education as a core element of organizational transformation, but also a necessity to own the responsibility of ensuring that we have upskilling, reskilling, right, deployed appropriately to be able to tackle the shift that the technology is bringing. So those are three sort of core elements of my approach in thinking about AI and responsible AI. But then, of course, there's accountability, transparency, and explainability, privacy and security, safety, and fairness. All elements that are very typical that you've seen before. That will focus on other parts of the people, process, and technology structure or framework.
Tia, what I love about your background is that you've been able to I don't know if you've applied this framework in the same way throughout, like, the different sort of, um, entry points in your career and where you've been able to have impact. Can you talk a little bit more about, like, how you've evolved your approach and kind of where you started in your career and thinking about this and kind of where it's evolved to today
Yeah.
based on the changes that are
So
happening in the world?
I honestly, I think there are certainly, hindsight is 2020, right? When we
Yeah.
look back, we kind of see the patterns, but we
Yeah.
don't always recognize that in the moment,
Yeah.
right? Throughout our careers. So I think I've been able to more succinctly codify or frame it now
Mm.
versus, looking back at that or when this was happening. But I started off as a programmer. So my background is in computer science, right? I received a computer in the third grade for having high achievement scores in reading and math in the school, and it was a very basic computer. But at that time, Commodore VIC 20 for those of you that are like old school heads, and I decided I was going to be a computer engineer. So I, in fact, went to school for computer science and computer engineering at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and got my degree in computer science and minor in mathematics. So that's where I started. I started programming. And it was at the time where we were first starting to put information on the internet. So one of my first, second job out of college was in fact like building internet presence for businesses, right? And so this was like the internet and e-business, and then we started to move into e-commerce, right? And what do we do in terms of helping equip organizations to sort of realize value in the internet and be able to seek other sort of ways to generate revenue and drive business in an e-commerce platform. So I did that, and we had like white label e-commerce. I was working for a managed services provider in that context, doing those sorts of things and building systems and looking at integration, systems integration, because now we wanted to tie not just to the presence of a website, but integrate that into business operations. And so that was the first work for me, and starting to look at data, understand systems, and integrate
Mm.
in order to drive business outcomes. And the work that I've done since then, as was mentioned earlier, has been white label social media for organizations to drive collaboration and interaction with both employees and their customers, and then moving into mobile device security, so on and so on. And I think all of those have given me one perspective about like the organizational transformation that's necessary with digital transformation and that kind of shift. But I also have seen some of the impact of technology coming in and the changes that were necessary, or the things that we failed to pay attention to, and the
Mm.
opportunities I believe that we also have now as we look at AI and other emerging technologies. How do we learn from our past? How do we look at other transformation and see opportunities for us to do this differently and or better to better shape what happens in our future?
Tia, is there a specific example around that, like where you sort of have seen a lesson in the past and you think, either we've learned from that or we could learn from that? That would be
Well, I
really
think the obvious
insightful.
one, and people talk about this one a lot, is
Yeah.
in social media, right? Like the things that we didn't pay attention to in terms of social media, not understanding one, perhaps some of its intention, and then recognizing intention. What does that mean in terms of unintended impact, right? And so the consequence of that, of course, we've been seeing today, whether that is in the exchange of information in ways that could be harmful, misinformation or disinformation that gets carried through that. The way that we have been hyper uh, is it sensitized or really hyper focused in social media environments, intentionally so, right? But then what does that have in terms of an impact on people, the way we engage, interact, the way we consume information, how we are being driven by that? And some of that, of course, was by an intent by the technology providers, but not necessarily. We were less aware, and then the consequence of that, we've been trying to walk back, contain, and or grapple with, especially as we think about the impact to
Mm.
sort of social engagement, right? And I think those are things that we can learn from as we think about AI as well. And certainly there've been um, signals for us to pay attention to that I think some are much more conscious of, certainly in the space of sort of ethical and responsible AI, hinting towards that. But I think that there are opportunities for businesses to be mindful as well as we build, so that technology, again, is beneficial to all. And I think at the end, it'll be beneficial to business too.
I think one thing I hear you saying, sorry, I know Shish, you want to jump in, is that just to kind of circle back on what you just said, I'm hearing you say is that, you know, I think a lesson is that let's think about the potential consequences now. Let's not wait till the consequences happen, but let's learn from the fact that they have happened. And how do we really take those lessons and think about
So,
like sort of almost backward plan, right? From like
yeah,
the worst case scenario or the best case scenario.
I think that's ideal, right? It does
Yes.
require time and energy for us to take a step back and to look at that. But we also have the benefit of like research institutions, educational institutions that have been long looking at like trends in technology advancement. I even use this example sometimes when we talk about it. I got it from someone else, but I've kind of expanded on it, taken it a little further. And this is talking about uh, the transformation, the shift in work, the adjustment in skills, going from when we were reliant on horse and buggy for transportation versus an automobile, and right, and all that happened in that. So one of the things, and the reason why I bring this up is you talk about unintended consequences. Well, at the time, and I'm sure in the process, we never realized or thought that emissions now coming out of the automobiles that are now making it easier for us to transport, for us to move, for us to actually have commerce, was going to have an impact on our environment in the way that it does, right? But we recognize that that shift meant a lot of things in terms of changing the dynamic as far as how we engage, our opportunities to move into different areas of the country and region, the way in which we like conduct business and sales, right? Um, Roads now had to be changed, right, from dirt roads. Like all of that was technology advancing in ways that made or required change for individuals, skills, industry, right, business, as well as opened up opportunity. That's a great example. The unintended consequence, right, in terms of climate impact, wasn't something we foresaw. But now we have that as history and evidence or information for us to go back and look at in order to hopefully think more uh, uh, consciously about or intentionally about the impact and be thinking and planning. We won't cover it all, but I think there's a lot that we can pay attention to that hopefully will help us to be much more uh, judicious in terms of how we're using the technology and what that means in the future.
Thanks, Tia, for that insight. You must have seen this in all the technology shifts you have witnessed thus far, and I would say the latest one, which is AI, is is even more so all about moving fast.
Yeah.
So businesses, when they hear responsible AI or you know taking a step back, like those are words which automatically make people think, okay, I'm going to fall behind, right? Like I
Right.
can't innovate fast. So what can you share, like examples would be great, but can you share how businesses can ethically and responsibly implement AI while maintaining a competitive edge and not fear like falling behind their competitors?
Well, I'd say to you that it is very real that the intentionality that's required in order to focus on and think about responsible AI and put those best practices in place is likely to take some time, right? One of the things that I tell organizations is that we don't expect that everybody like covers everything all at once. This is a journey. And so we have to consider, what the use cases, the potential risk and impact of that particular application. Understanding that context, I think, helps to make some determinations about like what you step into first, right? Whether and how far, right? So some organizations will start off with just having some manual processes. For instance, having those who are using like toll gates in terms of product development, right? Introducing questions that could be a part of their initial sort of product documentation and requirements, establishing personas and anti-personas to look at who we intend to serve and making sure that we have all of those stakeholders identified, and then anti-personas to be able to like unpack where there is a potential for unintended consequence when we have a population or subgroup that we intend not to serve, right? So, like thinking about those things and putting those things into practice may be one step in the journey, and then having like a toll gate at the end, right, where we are now checking for have we done certain tests, have we validated our definition of what is fair in the beginning that we now are verifying. People will move along the journey in terms of their maturity as well to like having very automated systems, and workflow, right? Having monitoring and other things enabled, uh, being able to look real time at output and evaluate their responses, having the kind of integration that will give and create feedback loops for them to have like ongoing and continuous improvement, right? Like those are I think those are different places on the spectrum that will differ depending on the maturity of the organization. So I would say we have to start somewhere. Education oftentimes is one of the starting points, and then looking at how do we continue to build the capability, especially as our use cases and the potential for impact increases. And maybe we start off with more automation and more monitoring and additional sort of process and tooling when we recognize that this is a system or a product that will have some consequential impact to people's rights or access to resources, et cetera. So again, the risk level of the application matters in terms of like how we engage. But I would say again that I think there's a place for everyone to start. Oftentimes, education and equipping their people is a good first start. And yes, there is a cost in terms of time and resource, but it is an investment that's worth it, especially when we think about the ways in which that will help yield the kind of trust in organizations and their products and in the technology as a whole, right? And we know that there's sort of this trickle down. If people don't trust the technology, whether that's happened in a number of other businesses or not, that's going to have an impact on their sort of inherently on how much they trust you building it and using it in your products as well. So I think it's an investment that's worth it. I would say that responsible AI is good business, and taking the time now versus being on perhaps the wrong side of things when there is some consequential impact that is now in the papers or having an impact on people is not where we want to sit. So this is insurance, if you will, right? But we all find that there's generally a need for having insurance. Right.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. And just to go back to the point where you mentioned, uh, you know, training people, and since people fit in the whole people process technology framework that you outlined, what else can people do to you know their make sure they are positioned to benefit from AI? Because the other concern that people have or employees have is they are going to be replaced, or the work is going to be done by the AI, so they will, I don't know, they'll be impacted in some way, shape, or form. So what do you think people can do?
I think it's using the technology, right? It's getting familiar with it. I think about AI and what we're seeing in terms of the evolution of work and skills, very much like what happened with the internet and computers. There was a time where, and I'm old enough to have remembered typing on a typewriter, right? And then making the transition to the Brother word processor. Brother was the big one at the time, right? And so you had this sort of difference. And so then, typing was a skill that was necessary in order to be marketable. But then it was, you had to like have a little bit more familiarity word processing. And then we went to computers. You need to have some computer skill in almost every job and role, right, to be marketable. And I think we're making this shift now from an AI perspective, where that is now a foundational skill that everybody is going to have to understand. Not coding or like training models, but using AI, right, and being comfortable with that. And so my recommendation would be for folks to not fear it, but embrace it and start to use it so that they can figure out ways that it can help. Augment the work that they're doing, be creative about like opportunities that might present, to better serve their customers in ways. And again, be much more marketable, because I promise, if you have somebody that's doing the same job, but that can do it in less time because they're using AI, and then can go on and think about like other problems and, be creative in other areas, or step into, and then we have AI today that can be filling a need where there is shortages for resourcing as well, right? So it's not just displacement, but when we have skill shortages, there is an opportunity for AI to be in that mix as well. So but to your point, like, what do people do? Use it, get comfortable with it. Start. I was talking to some teachers who have to. Are thinking about ways in which to incorporate it into their classrooms, right? We want our teachers to equip our young students, and they don't want to use it. Now, why don't you just, make some suggestions, or put in what you have in your refrigerator and allow it to give you recipes for like what to cook for, the week, right? And so your meal planning, or little things like planning the next vacation, or getting ideas for, I have kids, so I'm always like trying to think about cool parties to do, like getting ideas for parties. I know we love Pinterest for that, but we could also use AI. But little ways in which they could start to see how it can be useful, I think also helps to break down the barriers in terms of engaging, and the fear that some people have with the technology. There are lots of little courses that are available as well, some of which are free or low cost, that people can start to get a little bit more acquainted with prompt engineering, or just using like, any of the chat interfaces or chat applications.
Yep. Sorry, I just had one follow-up question. So, that's an employee perspectives, but I guess how are employers approaching this? Are you getting more questions like, "Hey, I have a skills gap and I need to fill it with AI," or it's more like, "Hey, I have too many people, I need to get rid of some of them." Like, how are people coming at this?
I think we see a little bit of both. I would, we absolutely are seeing companies that want to seize on the opportunity to gain efficiency in their organizations, right? And if there are opportunities for productivity gains and greater efficiency, and AI can do that, they're certainly interested in that. I would say that we probably aren't seeing like the wholesale movement of people resources because AI is in the mix, because there's still some things that are giving people pause or concern, reliability, right, with the systems. And so perhaps um, we're not seeing people like largely displaced yet. I think our initial, or some of the industry assessments of job displacement was, uh, uh, you know, much larger than is real at this particular time. So I would say yes, we're seeing people, right, that want to see efficiencies, but I do also see opportunities, in particular, like in healthcare, right, where they're saying we have shortages and have for a while, especially at post COVID. What are ways that we can use the technology to offset that? And so I think there's huge opportunity there.
Thank you for that. This is fascinating. One of the things for me, in terms of themes that I'm hearing from you, excuse me, you, you talked about kind of the difference in maturity levels in companies, and their approaches based on their difference in their in terms of where they are in their maturity and growth with respect to AI. So whether they're taking that approach around just educating their people around it, or adapting their processes around it, or actually, implementing tools. And then you kind of have this similar almost approach on the people side, right? Where it's okay, you may not be comfortable using it for your actual professional life yet, but maybe play around with it in your personal life just to develop that familiarity and develop that comfort. And so thinking about that similar approach, that there's a spectrum for people and for organizations and things like that,
Right.
thinking more comprehensively about the digital transformation journey. You've been involved in some significant digital transformations over the years. And so I'm wondering, what are some of the important lessons you've learned about aligning people, processes, and technology for a successful transformation?
I think, well, certainly like the value in education are things that I mentioned and explained in my approach to responsible AI. I think comes straight out of that, like that experience and exposure. I think the other thing that I would just highlight is, and this is true for all of us, right? Seeing the value for ourselves, right? Like what's in it for us, and making sure that we are communicating that value throughout the organization. So, um, you know, organizational transformation, right? A big part of that is how we communicate the change, right? And the changes that are necessary, the direction that we're going, and how we bring people along in that journey. And I think that that is another part when we think about employers or businesses now leveraging the technology and bringing that into their organizations or even their plans to leverage it in their products. How do we, communicate that? How transparent are we? How do we bring our employees along that journey, and then as well as our customers, because I think there's a messaging that comes in the way that we design and share like the trajectory with our customers and advertise that to them, that I think is useful too. So that those are the things that I think I've learned along the way that I continue to apply as we're working with other companies and thinking about the value that technology can bring. The other thing that I would say, and this is sort of grounded in like my personal belief that we need to also keep people at the center, right? Our businesses, our organizations don't work without people that are helping to make it real in terms of our employees and the people that ultimately are going to consume our products and services. And I think that thinking about what is going to be impactful, beneficial, and meet the needs of those people are important for us as we look at these shifts and changes with technology as well.
It sounds like you're saying that the transformation is truly a journey, in that
Yeah,
like all journeys, everyone needs to be brought along, and so organizations should be cognizant of how their customers, their employees, their stakeholders, et cetera, are being brought along that journey. If I'm
absolutely.
hearing you correctly.
Yeah, yeah. I think you consolidated that well. That's words.
No, thank you so much. So, Salima, I'll kick it back over to you.
Yeah, Dia, again, in the many lives that you've lived, one life that you're living now is on the policy side of AI, and I'm really curious about, where you are seeing, the policy world going with AI, and in particular where, there's a tension, of course, around, and there has been for some time around, regulation, the whole world of regulation, and what, technology companies moving at a certain pace and wanting to continue to be innovative without being sort of, held back by legislation. While at the same time, legislation can be very important. Regulations can be important in guiding and providing. The kinds of boundaries that are healthy, hopefully, towards building good technology. But that this is an ongoing conversation and,
Yes.
and tension. So, what are you seeing in this space that is really important for us all to be thinking about and considering?
I- This is very much a what a nascent area, right? As you mentioned, there is a lot of interest in having some legislation. And I think it's important, right? If we think about technology being a tool or AI being a tool
Mm.
that's being deployed and used in a number of ways, then we can understand the likelihood that a tool can be used for good or for bad, right? And how do we control those opportunities or the cases where people might use the tool for bad is typically with some sort of law, right, that makes that
Yeah.
inappropriate um, and some consequence as a result of that, right? And so I think that while companies, and I'm certainly an advocate for us thinking ethically and responsibly and inclusively in terms of how we build technology and what that looks like in our process and policy deployments, I think there's a very real need as well for regulation, for laws to be in place that actually helps to provide that additional guardrails to make sure that people who have bad intentions, right, can be prohibited and/or there's consequence for that. I think at the same time, we also have to realize that even sometimes with our good intentions, that there can be a negative impact, and that's the other place that legislation plays a part. So, right now, I think we're seeing there was the EU AI Act that was proposed earlier this year, and the expectation and all the groundswell around that was that it could be and would be as impactful as GDPR was for businesses, right, operating and impacting folks in the EU. There are a number of countries that are all looking for Canada's passed legislation, others that are looking that are probably pretty close to coming up with something that varies. The thing about the EU AI Act that I think was good was looking at this risk-based approach that we were talking about. Do we understand the risk? Do we uh, have additional diligence when there is greater risk or greater likelihood of impact to individuals? Um, so I think that is happening. And then, of course, we've got here locally in the US, don't have federal legislation conversations about when and where that will occur. And there are questions about where that will happen. With every administration, things will shift and change. And then we also have, like, at the state and local level, a number of states coming up with legislation, some more comprehensive than others, but they're all looking. Many of them are looking at that complicates things a bit, right? With countries doing their own thing that could have an impact, states doing their own thing that could have an impact, and maybe not the kind of coalescing or harmonized legislation could certainly be a challenge. Less so, perhaps, for some larger companies, or they can absorb that complication. But smaller, companies and startups, much more complicated. So I think, as far as like the legislative landscape, the hope, or as things are moving forward, I hope that we get to some more consistency. And there are some standards that are being considered to help, that foundation, so that there is the fair opportunity for others to play, and it doesn't just sit well for or create a scenario where large companies are better
Mm.
suited, and then smaller ones have much more of a challenge, or maybe even pushed out of opportunity, and opportunity to play because of the legislative regime.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you're saying is so important for us to consider, and especially in the light of the fact that, even globally, and that's again a focus of our podcast, is a sort of the global approach to this. And we know that, like some countries are just outpacing other countries in the space of innovation in general, have historically done so, and now even more so with AI. And so, that the legislative piece, the complexity of the legislative piece or the regulatory piece is is even more important to consider within that context, right? Of like, what's happening in the African continent is very, very different. The conversations that are happening than there are in the United States, in part because they're at a different point in the process with AI, but also like, we need to have regulations that allow for people to also innovate,
Yes,
not just hamper innovation. Yeah.
that's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep, just to go off of that, and you mentioned that, you went with a risk-based approach, right? And we have had some guests over here And risk means different for different people, right? So, and when I say people, I mean even countries look at risk differently.
Mhm.
So maybe, you know, just to give you an example, maybe 15 years ago, your social security number might have been, something that you would consider that it's like a high, wherever it is, it's a high risk application. But given that we have had like 500 breaches by now, I think everybody is like, you know what, it's just a number at this point, right? So how do you account for something like that?
Well, I think this is some of the challenge, right, with coming up with the standard and/or having policy that is consistent or that has this sort of harmonized language that works across the board is the complexity of how we're going to define risk. I think NIST does a good job in their RMF, the risk management framework, and thinking about like risk and impact. But I know that there is, as you say, some variance in that. But I think that, and we've said this too, right? Like I mentioned, like application specific. So we need to think at the context and then make determinations based on that. And I think that unfortunately is some of the complication with regulation is that we uh, context matters, right? And that's going to be different in every jurisdiction. What is acceptable here in the U.S. May be different than in another country, and how do we account for that? So I think there will um, realistically be some variance when we go back to legislation, but hopefully we can find some common threads that make it easier for compliance across the board.
Yep. And usually when it comes to businesses, right, uh, they are, and if we are talking about tech businesses specifically, their most risky, or application that they would consider to be the highest risk would be, their application which generates the most amount of money, right? So how should an organization now, I guess, going back to considering like adopting AI on a high risk application at a reasonably fast pace, because it sounds like high risk means it's going to be a slower adoption. Like, how do you balance that?
Right. I think there's always this trade off that has to be explored when we think about the speed and pace of innovation and balancing, the risks, right? And ensuring that that we're doing the work to address the potential risks. And again, I'm going to use this like it depends or this sort of nuance in terms of context. I think each business has to evaluate that, right? What we're talking about as far as risk is not like risk to in the way that you described risk as far as like the opportunity to have increased revenue or that is my most productive or lucrative application. It's really the risk and impact to people and society, right? That people are measuring or evaluating, and what that means in terms of its individuals' rights and access. So that's the way that they're exploring that, and I think we have to again look at every application and consider like what is the value that we intend to bring or that it can have. What does that mean to the overall business? There we go. Like the value alignment, this sort of understanding of risk and accountability, and making judgment calls based on that.
I realize that we're coming close to the end of the episode, so can't let you go without asking just for a bit of prognostication. So as you look to the future,
No idea.
just for businesses, what do you see as one or two of the big opportunities and or threats with respect to AI?
Well, it's always hard to say, right? When people ask this question, like, "What do you see? Where will we be in the future?" or whatever. I tell you honestly, I would love like a really good like automated robot that can sweep the floor because my Roomba oops, I wasn't supposed to say the name. My my system here does not do well. So like if we get to technology and automation that really could help clean the house, that would be amazing for me and anyone willing to like, get their innovation and me test it out. I'm happy to do so. Um, but I say that in jest, but like the reality of where things will go, I think is challenging because we look at where we were at the end of 2022 and what's happened in the course of the last 2 years, and there's just been a lot of movement that was unexpected. So, what would I say? A lot more in terms of like unexpected innovation and rapid sort of change. And I think we need to be preparing for that. So, in our processes and our approach to evaluating our products as we start to build things out, like understanding the necessity to be continuously improving and evaluating our systems, our structures, reviewing our products. You think of our AI products as living systems, not living like they are beings. I want to make that distinction,
Yeah.
but that they're changing and adjusting, and so we need to have the kind of structure in our businesses that can accommodate that review and that ongoing um, ecosystem that's necessary to support the systems, the change, and to evolve, right, or to iterate. So I think that's true. I don't foresee us having, being, somebody was asking me, are we giving like the AI rights and like none of that. I think that when we understand what AI does, it's still like a huge sort of hyper um, pattern matching system, and that's looking at his data as a context for how it is driving output. So I don't see it like living being having rights in that way, and I'm going to do everything that we can not to see that happen as well. But I do think that like what we were talking about from a regulatory perspective, I hope that what we're seeing from a regulation perspective is driving and will drive more people to do the intentional work that's necessary to ensure the system safety, so that we remove some of this space where I'm saying, we've got this weight or balance that regulation is going to push us in some ways to force
Mhm.
a behavior that ensures or that drives towards some greater safety with the systems. That's what I'd like to see, and not just like a checking the box thing, right? But that we really do see the shift where the trust that I have in the product really matters to um, companies, businesses, those that are producing, and they seek to drive output that will meet our needs and be beneficial to all.
Dia, I feel like you are so pragmatic. As much as we're talking about very big things like risk and regulation and, like the technology that's moving really, really fast, I feel like the way that you talk about it brings it down to, hey, folks, like,
I hope
if we think
so.
about
I hope
this,
so. Right? Like
we're,
we can
we're
do
going to
this,
do
right?
good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're going to do good if we go down this road. It's going to be beneficial to us, to our customers, to users. And hopefully, direct the innovation in a way that's really gonna serve humanity. So I really
I
appreciate
honestly
that.
think that, right? I think that there are certainly some things that we don't understand, that we still don't have like
Yes,
full capability
yes,
for. I was talking to someone the other day, and we were talking about hallucinations, right? Like we
right.
one of our scientists, right, haven't solved that problem. There are things that we can do, right, to reduce the likelihood for hallucinations and get greater reliability out of the systems. And again, I think that these are opportunities. One, for us to say, we don't have perfect systems and perfect technology doesn't mean that we can't use it, right? So now we need to think about like what is, because we also are not perfect, right? I was talking to a company that said that they're people, in evaluating a certain process, we're looking at like 60% accuracy. Well, if your technology can do 80%, like isn't that good? Isn't that better? Shouldn't we use it? um, and so my hope is that we can break these things down and address, some of the risks and be much more conscious and intentional about how we build. And then we have this continuous cycle, right? So that we can evaluate things and be ready for there's something new that we don't understand. And when we
Mhm.
understand the risk, then we make really informed decisions about where we use it and where we don't, right? What makes sense, where we need a higher degree of accuracy, right? And true and reliability. And that means perhaps we don't use the technology here, but there are plenty of other opportunities for us to do so. And I think there are opportunities for us to see the technology actually level the playing field and create opportunity and access for people that typically have been marginalized and underserved. And that's the part that excites me, because I am seeing uh, places where that occurs. And I hope that the things we do today, again, intentionally thinking about people, process, technology, and minimizing risk, will help us get to a place where we can see the technology used in ways that benefit us. And I think that in the end, that's going to benefit business, right? That'll give them what they want too. So
Well, thank you for your optimism and for your pragmatism. We really appreciate it. We've learned so much from you, and I know that our listeners are gonna take away a lot. Thank you, and I wanna talk to you in, like, another year to see, like, where things have evolved to,
right,
because I feel
I'm so
like
optimistic.
yeah, 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 see where this optimism is leading us. I'd love that. So thank you very much. We really appreciate having
Thanks
you.
for having me. It was a great conversation.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Dia.
much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, welcome to our jam session. That was so insightful. I want to throw the ball out to both of you. What did you walk away with?
Should I go for it?
Sure, so much. Uh, Salima, you nailed it. I think her pragmatism, but also her optimism around the technology,
Mm,
um, it it's infectious, and I appreciate that because I firmly believe, similar to other technologies, AI the genie's out of the bottle here, and so it's something a technology that needs to be embraced. There's of course work that needs to be done to, as Dia was saying, just harmonize the approach to it and regulation and things like that. But in terms of the functionality of the tools and the things that it will allow people to be able to do, trying to ignore it is like trying to stay working on a typewriter in the age of computers and laptops. It's
mm,
just it's almost not tenable now, and it's going to be even less so
mm,
very soon. And so, from at least from an employee standpoint and from a worker standpoint, the sooner that people can become comfortable with it and understand how it can benefit them and things like that, I think it'll be of huge benefit. And then from an organizational standpoint, again, companies learning how to embrace it will, I think, lead to greater efficiencies, profitability, and things like that. So I thought it was a great conversation.
Yeah, same here. I think you know and I'm glad that leaders like Tia are so optimistic and so practical. One thing that she mentioned, which I would like to re-emphasize, and this is something also I personally have to start doing and remind myself to do, is use the technology, right?
mm,
Not just read about it, just use it, understand it, because it's out there, and it's as Dia mentioned, you don't really, I mean, we are worried about the technology, but you know whereas employees should be thinking about, hey, you know if I don't use this, it's not the technology I need to be worried about. It's like the person who knows how to use the technology and maybe can do my job in half the time, right? So that's a big takeaway for me. And the other one I would say is that, and as Dia mentioned, we are still learning, right? Regulations are maybe not there, or are kind of in the very nascent stage of being formed. And businesses have this opportunity to craft the regulations or interpret them right now, because what we uh, don't want end up happening is, and this I heard in another podcast, this reference which makes puts this into perspective for me is, like, we don't want too many referees on the football field, right? We do want referees on the football field, but we don't want you know referees more than the players themselves, right? So I guess that we are still early in the game. We do want to, like, employers do want to get into understanding where we are at, and figure out what makes sense and what doesn't, so that we don't end up in that situation in the future.
Yeah, and I think we also want the right referees on the field, right? That's the other piece of this. I think that's really, really important. So it goes I thinking about our conversation with Olivia Gambelin and how she was talking about, sort of the EU regulations and how they're happening they're being designed and built in the EU, and now they're supposed to get applied in the United States. And there is a translation issue. I use that concept a lot, that where we need to be thinking about, and Dia talked about this, the contextual realities, right, of how we're building technology and the innovations that we're having. And the other thing I was thinking of, and both of you sort of brought it up, is like the sort of the practicality of it about using the technology. I love that, but I've been noticing this thing that's been happening with people where I talk to people about like, I'm talking to them. I was talking to somebody recently today, actually, and they were saying to me, I'm going to craft this email now, but I'm going to use ChatGPT to do the editing. And I was like, why are you whispering? Okay, like, is this ugly, dirty secret that you're using ChatGPT? So I think, and this has happened, I swear, some version of that has happened in my conversation with a lot of people this past month. I don't know why. So I think there's something about this, about, people getting comfortable with this idea that chat GBT, like, unless you're using it to write your essay, okay, fine, that's a problem. But if you're using it to like augment or to support or to whatever, that's okay. That's actually what it's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to be your partner, your co-ride in life, right? To help ease certain things for you. Why not? That's amazing, right? It frees you up to do other things. So I think that there's a comfort level that everybody is trying to like get at with this. Um, and that figuring out where it, and again, to Dia's point, like where it's going to be useful for us, where we should be using it, where we shouldn't be using it. And I think that's a learning curve for companies, but that's also a learning curve for society in general, and employees as well.
Couldn't agree more. I think you know, whichever language model a person chooses to use. And I think as people get more comfortable with them overall, they become kind of less of that secret, to your point, and just more of a, this just makes sense. It saves time. It allows you to focus on the important things, which are the critical thinking, the strategic thinking, all of those things that are going to lend more impact to whatever is being communicated, as opposed to trying to make sure that you put a comma in the right place, or capitalized, or or even just sentence structure. So right there with you.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, there is some, I don't know why, there is some stigma to it. I was talking to, as you said, like, some people should not use it for writing essays, and I would argue, why not, right? Like, they should, right? Like, because I was using it to write some articles, so the idea is definitely mine, right? It's just the expression portion of it that I usually struggle with. Like, how should I put forth this idea in a more persuasive manner, or something, or something where it's it reads like a story, right? So those are things where I felt like I wanted AI, which is
Yeah.
what a college essay would be, right? It should kind of read like a story, or your opinion. So maybe the core idea, as long as the core idea is yours, um, and even in some cases the AI can give you things where you would be like, huh, I didn't think about that, but it makes sense. So
Yeah.
I don't see why need to have a stigma saying we should not use it somewhere versus we should. I feel like we should use it everywhere.
I, well, okay, we're about to get into a fight because kidding. I do think that, and I also think that there is a danger of people losing their critical thinking faculties and their ability to form an argument that's their own, right? So I think that I completely agree with you. I think we should absolutely be using whatever whatever system you want to use to help you write a better essay. Sure, why not, right? Um, but if it's writing your essay for you, like literally from beginning to end, including coming up with the idea and all the content in the middle, then you've basically done nothing, right? You've just basically copy and pasted and sent it over. And for me, I worry about human society. I really do. Like I was thinking about this a couple of days ago. I was driving my son from preschool, and I just thought to myself, okay, so what happens if we do like autonomous driving, right? Driving is a very important skill that humans have learned over time. And all of a sudden, you're going to get autonomous cars, right? We're all going to sit inside. Driving skills will go. So, what will that mean? Like, what happens if all of a sudden everything shuts down and we don't know how to move in the world because we don't know how to drive anymore, right? So, I just think that there's like a balance between figuring out we will learn new skill sets. I think is what I'm also hearing you say. We could learn new skill sets, right, from having AI do certain things for us. But I also think we're going to have to really think really hard about what happens when everything shuts down and we can't survive because we've relied on this thing to do everything or whatever for us, you know? I'm not a doomsday person at all. Like that's not me at all. I'm very optimistic about technology, and I just think there's a intentionality that we have to have in place about continuing to build our own skill sets as humans. I don't know.
This might be our most contentious jam session to date,
Woo!
but I think it highlights the potential for a future topic in terms of an actual show, because how do you continue to grow and innovate just as a civilization once you begin to outsource thoughts and ideas? All right. And I think that that's a very, very real question to be grappled with. I'm not a doomsday person at all either, but I do think that human innovation is essential for human survival. And so, how do we ensure that we don't lose that skill set?
Yeah.
But don't know if we'll solve that today. But I do think we should talk about it in a future episode.
100%.
All right. Any closing thoughts before we head out?
Great conversation.
That was good. That was good. And I'm glad that Ashish got into it and I got into it a little bit.
Yeah, look, listen. Next time we're just bringing out the gloves. I love it.
Should have next time. I'm waiting for some fire from you too. So
all right, listen. Okay, I'm bringing it. I wrestled one season in high school, so
whoa,
I'm ready.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll be seeing you all soon again.
All right. Have a great one.
Thank you.